So what we'd like to do is open with a word of prayer. If I could get Senator Halpern to help us with that.
Lord, thank you. We know that there are so many opportunities in front of us. Help to guide us through this new study committee as we seek to find ways to connect Georgia to the rest of the world. And these things we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, hold on. Now we're officially open for business. We'd like to check to see if there are any comments on this side. Yeah.
I'm good.
Any comments on this side? Okay, we're ready to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all for being here, and particularly want to thank our presenters for joining us. You know, Georgia has been at the intersection of trade and commerce for 200 or so years, due to our geographic location, but even more importantly, in the last 5 decades or so, because of our policy in terms of state government, with the intersection of the railroads during the a couple hundred years ago to today, and we still remain ideally located for commerce and for business, and not only the southeastern United States, but the entire nation. If you think about it, 40% of the population of the United States is serviced through our ports. That tells you the just one small token of the impact that Georgia has worldwide. Currently, we have many foreign companies that have invested in Georgia, and a lot of Georgia companies investing in a foreign business. And we want to make sure that we continue to develop that. We hear a lot of news and information about inflation and about. Did y'all have something for the good of the committee?
Yes, sir. We were planning how we're going to address you here shortly.
Thank you. With this august body.
I apologize, but we just want to get our plan together.
There you go. So the committee is tasked to investigate the need, or if it is even necessary, strengthen the relationship that Georgia has on various relationships that Georgia has throughout the world. And our initial impact visits will be in England and in Germany. And so we're looking forward to that. And we'd also like to recognize and thank our Department of Economic Development and Commissioner Wilson and others that will be involved in that. We've had a couple of good meetings with them already, and received a lot of encouragement. So with that having been said, we will ask for our presenters to come forward, and we'd like to call on Josh Stevens and Nico, and I don't know pronunciation, Weinberg. That's easy. Okay. Sounds like a beer. Weinberg. Okay. Thank you. Okay. You're making an emotion. Okay. Would you, as you guys open, for the benefit of the committee, would you give a little bit about your background? Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. My name is Joshua Stevens, Director of Policy and Government Affairs, Department of Economic Development. Been working with the department for several years in and around economic development for 10 years or so. Born and raised in Gainesville, Hall County, resident of Gwinnett County and Peachtree Corners now. My colleague here, Nico Weinberg.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I see some familiar faces. Good to see everybody. My name is Nico Weinberg. I'm Director of International Relations, as well as Chief of Protocol for the state of Georgia. I've been with the state of Georgia for just under 15 years now. Most recently was April 2020 that I moved into this role. Prior to that, I was actually Director of International Investment, so touching on both of those elements. And one thing I wanted to mention about the role of protocol, in most states that actually is housed under the Capitol, but in Georgia, because the ties are so close between the consular corps and the business community. My role is actually housed under the Department of Economic Development.
Super. Now, Josh, your background, who have you worked for?
I've had the distinct pleasure of working for several great leaders throughout this state, but one I would like to call attention to is Senator Jeff Mullis. One of his many aides over the years who
Is
have
this
gone on.
this being live streamed? It is. Okay. I'll hold my comments.
And you too, sir.
Certainly.
Thank you. Good to have over here. Before she showed me to how that is an outstanding role model on the Capitol Policy. Mr. Weinberg, are you over the protocol?
Gotcha.
Yes, sir.
So are we going to have to take some kind of plan to read before it, so we won't create some incident?
If there's time left, we can certainly do that.
I don't have to. You know, where Americans just get business card and play that, but I hear here. And when you go someplace and present
your business cards. I know there's certain things that are very important and I want to be as polished as possible. So I'll take a little while. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, those were, excuse me, those are very memorable and very professional situations we're in.
Okay. Enough of the chatter. Josh,
Yes, sir. Thank you.
thank you.
Our intent today, thank you, Senator Miller, members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Commissioner Wilson sends his regards. Unfortunately, we have our board meeting occurring about this time down in Columbus. He unfortunately had to be down there, but you have Nico and I. And honestly, what we wanted to give you guys today is a little bit of an economic development update on FY22 jobs and investment, but also on the international relations side when it relates to foreign direct investment here in the state, as well as the key relationships that we have around the globe, but also here in the state of Georgia with the many other partners and external parties involved in international relations. So we've got about 10 or 12 slides here. We're going to be fairly efficient, but do want to give you guys a little bit of a summary of some of the recent information you guys have seen for jobs and investment to kind of catch you up on what's been going on in the economy. So with that, I will kick it off here. One thing I wanted to mention too before we get started here is that, while we appreciate the opportunity to be here, we just want to thank you for your continued partnership and all the ways in which you and your efforts here at the state capitol and the Georgia General Assembly contributes to the success that we are able to go around and speak with companies about, but also the leadership that we've had over the years. Senator Miller mentioned it, but we've been exceptionally blessed to have great leaders and leadership for a long period of time. And this is not just a few years. This has been many, many years over several administrations in the governor's office and multiple years in the General Assembly. So thank you guys. Just a quick primer here. You know that we're going to be focused mostly on FY22 jobs and investment from the Global Commerce Division, but I did want to mention that we oversee several other divisions as well in tourism, film, Georgia Council for the Arts, Centers of Innovation, as well as international trade, and also international engagement as well. So that's just one of the few divisions across our department that I wanted to mention before we dive into the big information on jobs and investment. So this has been coming out of a pandemic over the course of the past few years, and in FY22, we've had substantial, exceptional results when it comes to jobs and investment. And I'm going to dive into the trends, but the headline numbers here, 51,000 jobs created and over $21 billion in investment across 358 projects. That's new companies, that's expanding companies. Those are jobs all across the state. And I'm going to dive into how this compares over the past few years and some of the trends that we've seen on the next few slides. So one of the things that we like to point out is that this is not just a metro story. It's a metro and non-metro story. And 62% of the jobs, 62% of those 51,000 jobs occurred or will occur outside of the 10-county metro area. And when we talk about jobs created, this is 51,000 jobs is a huge number, but that is not a complete summary of all the private sector activity that has or will occur in the state. These are just projects and companies that we've had the fortune and opportunity to work with and help them through the process, make contact with them, learn about their operations. Also, when we talk, depending on how you splice the data, we look at non-metro versus metro, and 85% of that $21 billion happened outside of the 10 core counties of Metro Atlanta. So it was an opportunity. I wanted to take a second and focus on those two facts because this is a statewide story, not just a success of one area or the other. And I will actually look at county by county as well in another slide. But when we talk about job creation trends over a 5-year period in 2017, you'll notice that we've averaged around 24,000 to 29,000 jobs between 2017 and 2020. And then in FY21, we had an uptick to about 33,000 jobs. And then in FY22, this most recent year, we had a substantial jump to about 51,000 jobs. So that's a 53% increase in any one year, but you see a trend over the last couple of years. And, you know, just a few of the things that's within those numbers, projects nowadays, they're bigger, they're faster, they're looking for solutions that provide opportunities as quick as possible. I know we've got several folks in economic development here with Angie Giesling on the committee and Tim Evans here from Gainesville Hall County, as well as Senator Mullis, and I know Senator Gooch in his former role as well have seen economic development at the local level. But when we talk about solutions and why Georgia, why companies choose the state, it's a multitude of reasons that we hear. It could be supporting trade and innovation, could be proximity to a certain product or service or assets like the Georgia ports. I know we'll be hearing from the Georgia Ports Authority. I believe we've got a few folks coming in virtually. Could be a skilled workforce or quality of life, but there's a multitude of reasons that companies choose Georgia. And those are just a few of the reasons that we most often hear. So we want to dive a little bit into the investment trends as well. We noticed the uptick over the last 2 years in jobs, but when you compare investment as well, you'll notice that over the years 2017 to 2020, we fluctuated from about $5.5 billion to about $7.5 billion annually through our record tracking. But in FY22, we had nearly 11 billion. FY21, we had nearly 11 billion. And then this year, we nearly doubled last year. So that's been a substantial uptick. And one of the things I want to point out that's
COVID, and then companies coming out after COVID.
Yes, sir. One of the things that we have absolutely seen, and you've continued to hear, is how we stayed open during the pandemic, and we were able to continue to do virtual visits and all the things that we were able to do to keep answering companies' questions and when they knocked.
Whose decision was that, Steve?
Governor Kemp, as well as the many leaders and authority that the General Assembly enabled within that process too.
I'd like to finish up, Mr. Chairman, that we have had over 75 requests for information in 1 year's time, and usually a small agency like us is 3 or 4 years to have that many. So you can see the curve of companies kind of waiting and holding on to after the COVID thing hopefully kind of goes away, and then they're ready to explode like you're seeing here, I believe.
Yes, sir. And you know, there are two pretty significant outliers here when you talk about Hyundai and Rivian. Those are substantial projects, and they definitely are seen here in the numbers. But even when you back out I'll go back to job creation, even when you back out the jobs associated with Rivian and with Hyundai, you still have about 35,000 jobs in FY22, which is still a record. So it's absolutely a trend within a trend there. And then on the investment side, when you back out the investment associated with Rivian and Hyundai, we end up at I think it's 10.75 in terms of billions of dollars. So it's right there in line with FY21, but also another record. One of the things that I wanted to mention here that's a success within within the records that we've tracked. And this is a map showing from 2017 to 2022 within our data. And again, this does not incorporate private activity that may have occurred with companies that we did not meet with or speak with, whatever that may be. But there are 11 counties here, and I believe that we're closer to maybe 8. I'm checking internally to make sure, but there's 11 counties only between 2017 and 2022 that didn't either have an expansion, job creation project, some sort of activity that we were able to track through our sales force. So that's 93% of Georgia counties over the last 5 years when we splice the data that way. So happy to provide any more information on those, but that should be a lower number, hopefully in the near future. Just want to touch on a few growing sectors as well within FY22 numbers. This slide is showing this. We've discussed Rivian, we've discussed Hyundai, and the 675% increase that we saw in FY21 automotive industry jobs created versus FY22. But also within bioscience, headquarters, and fintech, we saw substantial increases as well within that data. So that's seen in projects located throughout the state. And on the next slide, I believe I've got a few slides here showing some recent locations, highlighting different companies and projects around the state. But just to call out a few, you've got Remington Firearms locating their global headquarters down in the LaGrange area, $100 million, 856 jobs. Arubis in Augusta within the automotive supply chain, electric vehicle supply chain, 125 jobs and 340 million over in the east side of the state. And then Aspen Aerogels down in Statesboro, which was a substantial project also within the electric mobility space. So just to kind of recap, I know that you see a lot of familiar names and companies here, but these are projects and jobs for every region of our state. And we've been especially proud to be a part of this process and the process. So I think we've got FDI slide here. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Nico, here, and we're going to kind of jump a little bit over to foreign direct investment trends and also cover some of the international relations piece.
Thank you, Josh. Senator Miller, members of the committee, it's a pleasure being here this afternoon and talk about some of the things that I feel like set Georgia apart from other states in the nation. And something that I'm particularly passionate about is, of course, international relations. And Georgia is a gateway to the world. We have, of course, the world's busiest airport, plus several fantastic seaports, which we'll hear more about. But first and foremost, we wanted to talk a little bit about, as Josh mentioned, foreign direct investment over the previous fiscal year. As you can see on this slide, South Korea, no surprise there, is right now currently by far the biggest investor. That is due to several large companies that have chosen Georgia. And then a couple of more traditional, so to say, investors that we've seen over the past years. Germany, not a surprise there. Japan, France, and the Netherlands round up this top 5 over the past year. But one of the things I really wanted to point out on this particular slide is in the lower left corner of the slide, is that foreign direct investment accounts for over 40% of the total investment in the state of Georgia, which is incredible. So this percentage fluctuates over the years, but it's always about 40, 45, sometimes closer to 50%. So that just indicates how important those international relations, international investment to our state are. And then next up, this is more on the total amount of countries that have representation in Georgia in terms of their businesses that are located here. There's different ways how you can count the international presence. So we looked at the top 10 countries with actual facilities in the state of Georgia, and then top 10 countries by employment. So the number of jobs that they actually have created here in Georgia. Again, a pretty traditional image here with the United Kingdom on top, Germany, Canada. I will not read the entire slides to you, but it just gives a great impression on how important those international companies are. And then my final slide for today is to talk a little bit more about the international relations piece. Georgia is a hub in the Southeast, which is not a surprise. So a lot of the consulates that have chosen Georgia as a location for their office here, we like to think they're just here for Georgia, and we treat them really well. We value the relationships that we have, but of course, they're here in the Southeast because they also represent their countries in our neighboring states. Sometimes we understand up to 15 other states that they might represent their countries at. And of course, the main reason for that is the connectivity. We are just so blessed with the airport, the international connections that we have, but also the connections that we have to the rest of the country, making it so easy for diplomats to travel southeast from right here in Georgia. So this is a slide that we are particularly proud of. Like I said, we treat our consulates really well. We think the importance of having them physically here is really important. A lot of companies, when they start looking for a location where they might want to expand in the US, starts with a place where they physically have somebody to talk to from their home countries. But more, and even more importantly, perhaps, is that the consulates that we have here in the state of Georgia also report back to their home countries what is going on in Georgia, the exciting things that are done here, the developments that we see. So all in all, when you look at the different ways that companies can be represented through a trade office or a consulate or a binational chamber, we have about 70 countries that have some type of representation here in Georgia, and that puts us right at the top nationwide in terms of representation. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Yes, sir, I've got it. Thank you so much. You've given us the committee an update on the international presence here in Georgia, and thank you for that. Can you, what countries or international regions do you see having the most opportunity for Georgia with our investments? Are there any countries that we need to focus on for Georgia companies' investments?
So absolutely. I mean, you look within the trends there, you can certainly see who the most prevalent investors are in terms of countries. Just for example, Commissioner Wilson got back a couple of days ago from South Korea visiting with some suppliers for Hyundai.
Yes.
That was a very strategic trip and absolutely one of the most important trade and investment partners that we have. He went over there along with the local communities and also in hopes to bring over some of the supplier network associated with the project. But you're asking for specific countries. We certainly track along those jobs and investment as far as the strategic countries in which we would visit and go to and do our outbound marketing tours. But one thing we didn't mention within the slides, and I know Nico is probably going to hit on this, but we have offices in 12 different strategic markets around the globe. Some of those.
That was my next question. So where are they?
Where are they?
Yeah, well, when I was chair, we put in the budget for China in China at where is it? Peking. No, that's the old
Qingdao is where.
No, it used to the Peking. That used to be the capital of China, but now it's Beijing. Thank you.
So
I did.
what are those 12 offices? Where are those?
Yes, sir.
So starting closest to home, we have an office in Montreal, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Brazil. Then we have 2 offices in Europe. One is located in the United Kingdom. The other one is located in Germany, in Munich. That one is also a little bit more unusual in a sense that they cover most of continental Europe from Munich. We have an office in Tel Aviv, Israel. And then we have offices in the Far East, in China, Japan, and of course, South Korea.
Are those locally staffed? I mean, how many, someone from Georgia goes there, plus they have support staff from that community? I'm asking that question.
It's a mix. It's a mix. Some are contracts, some are folks associated with trade. They work in different facets for the state, whether it's trade, business development, or other facets. And some are contracts, some are state employees.
Thank you. Recognize Senator Brass for a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So I was looking at the slide with the growing sectors.
Mhm.
There's like, major double digit, if not triple digit growth in those industry sectors. Are there other sectors that you're noticing kind of as an emerging trend? And do those? Some emerging industries that we're not yet seeing bubble up to this kind of significant.
I'd have, as far as the background details on some of these, I'd have to defer to, I'm going to have to get a little bit more information. However, I will say within the automotive, that captures a lot, but electrification, everything we see with the changes within the supply chain, that is absolutely our top strategic industry right now in terms of what we're seeing and all the activity. That's the one that stands out to me, but I'd be happy to follow up with some more detailed information.
Thank you. Senator Brass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know on those, you kind of had the top 4 or 5 foreign countries that have invested here. Do you have numbers for Taiwan? And I'm just kind of curious. I know they're kind of a increasing presence in Georgia and wanting to be a larger presence. And so what could we do as a state to help foster that relationship?
I think, yeah, we do have numbers on Taiwan. I apologize, I don't know them off the top of my head, but we do have numbers for Taiwan. We have excellent relationships with the representation of Taiwan here. It's the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office, TECO, here. So I think we already do a lot in terms of having a good handle on what is going on there. Of course, they're a leader in the world in terms of semiconductors. That's hugely important to the world, and therefore also us. So it is something it's definitely on our radar.
Well, in terms of semiconductors, is there, I know the feds just passed whatever bill they called it, who knows, but probably had nothing to do with semiconductors, but the bill itself did. Is there some sort of something we could do to kind of leverage that bill or that law to really foster that relationship and maybe bring semiconductors of larger presence here in the state?
I'll take the legislative component of that, and then you can cover the relationships part of it. But we certainly heard comments. We're talking with different types of companies from all over the world. No secret that semiconductor operations are looking around the U.S. or other, and that bill specifically having the federal subsidies and other things within it could have an impact. We typically don't talk too much about federal, subsidies or incentives associated for a specific project. We're more kind of state focused. But if it were, for example, Taiwan Semiconductor or whomever, and they had an interest in talking about it, we would certainly learn and speak to them all that we could. We couldn't make promises because they're grants. They've got to pursue grants, and they have to have site specific investments that they call out in order to get the grants. So depending on communities and all sorts of other variables on jobs and investment, we would be working alongside them. But the CHIPS Act itself, we wouldn't use too much in our marketing. But I personally look into it, make sure our teams are aware, especially as we've had a lot of different kind of federal legislation come down that relates to jobs and investment. So
following up on that, from a historical perspective, can you speak to how did Taiwan in particular, and there are other countries as well, Thailand, in fact, how did they land this semiconductor business, and how did it come so prolific in those regions? And can we take a page of that playbook? Can you comment on the historical perspective of it? I don't know
I don't know the answer to that one. I'm sure there is a manufacturing story there for a reason. I don't know. I do not know.
Okay, just wondering. And then what about the challenges that we'll have? What are some of the challenges that we experience from a statewide perspective for investment in Georgia?
You know, anytime we have this much success, you know, we talk about our unemployment rate too. We're at 2.8%, I think, 2.8, 2.9. It's not going to be a secret that workforce development and companies being at the table, talking with their educational institutions, making sure that they have pipelines of workers and doing all they can to staff the operations. Because one thing I will promise that we'll continue to do is recruit jobs and investment to Georgia. That won't be changing. But the workforce piece side of this is absolutely going to be a challenge for all industries. And as we have new industries come in, absolutely. Our job is jobs and investment here in the state. And we certainly speak with companies and try to advise them the best that we can to engage early and often. And I know Angie's got some good stories with her local community and the way the company's engaged in the education system. And I know that many of our local communities will have prime examples on how they've partnered with a company that's coming in to create a lot of jobs and how they're looking to bring workers to it. So it's definitely going to be a substantial effort and undertaking over the years, but we will continue to do what we do in bringing new jobs and investment here.
Yeah, and to add to that, the workforce piece, as a Department of Economic Development, we market what the product that our communities have. So we work very closely with our local economic developer contacts all over the state to continue to invest in property and product that we can market worldwide and domestically for that matter.
Okay, thank you. Senator.
Thank you. Switching gears just a little bit, but you know, tourism is economic development, and what a chance we have for the future with Atlanta's the host city for the 2026 Soccer World Cup, which if we are seen properly, it could help recruit more international businesses. What kind of strategy are you working on for the department to support that entity or that event coming to Atlanta in Georgia?
After all, over 3 billion people.
Yeah, the information says 3.2 billion people will be watching and another million or two here in Atlanta, I'm sure.
Yes, sir.
So what can we do to put our best foot forward to attract the best businesses to come here?
We know and understand that there are going to be a substantial amount of people here and probably nearly comparable to several facets of the Olympics, I would imagine. If
I would
not,
say this would probably be even bigger.
Yeah.
than the Olympics here.
it's not something that we're not preparing for. I don't currently have information on that one as
Okay.
far as what our department specifically is doing, but I know that they're, as it relates to state budget and other things that are,
I know Senator
being-
Gooch is real interested. He used to be a forward in the soccer arena. What you? Forward. Now you have the same position in soccer. I mean, how many rebounds did you get? No, I'm kidding.
it's like a goalie to me.
But the department used to be called Trade and Commerce, and the Senate chair of the Economic Development Tourism Committee changed the name to the Department of Economic Development Tourism. That would be me. Cause yeah, absolutely, it's the name, because that's Craig Lesser, the commissioner wanted that change at that time. Just trying to modernize it, kind of like if you're watching Love It or List It, you want to, put on the best foot forward to make sure your house looks good to sell or to love it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that's all I caught it.
One last question, if I may. When you put the industries, different industries up there, can we take a look at that again? The automotive
trends-
sector. The automotive sector was so much larger than everything else. I mean, it's 4 times the closest industry. I mean, so
So this is looking at trends from
Yeah.
FY 21
Yeah.
jobs created
And
to
that, and
FY
that's for
20.
Georgia.
Yes, sir. And a substantial part of that is Rivian and Hyundai.
Yeah.
So when you look at automotive jobs created in FY 21 versus automotive sector jobs in FY 22.
Oh, okay.
So when you've got,
We didn't create any in 22
well,
or 20.
well, FY 22 had
Pretty
the,
much, rather,
had
yeah.
the two substantial outliers.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that substantially impacts that 675. I don't know from a percentage wise how much that comes down when you back out Rivian and Hyundai, but it absolutely would.
That would be very interesting. And I look at some of those other sectors, whether it's fintech is very environmentally friendly and high-tech jobs, and as is bioscience, and then headquarters with our airports, I mean, our just it looks like those are areas that we have opportunities. So thank you very much for your presentation. Anything additional? I'm sorry, one more question. Few more questions. I'm sorry. No, you got Senator, what number are you?
See, I don't know if it's working,
Okay, well, you have to put it next to your face.
It's working now.
Pull it around there.
All right.
There you go.
I got it. Okay. I'm still learning, I guess. Anyway, thank you for the great presentation. I remember like last year, I met Consul General of Germany outside, the capital. And as I was talking to her, she said she's been here more than a year and she's never been to the capital. So I said, so important, somebody like that. So I invited her. So those are the things we all try to do to help Georgia. One of the questions that I have, it's a great presentation. We know how many companies investing and the dollars and stuff. Do you all keep track how many Georgia company may be opening an office overseas? What kind of impact we have? Do you all keep track of that at all? And that's my first question. Another question, you can answer all, we have a tendency, if you look at the budgets and everything else, and we import so much stuff, we don't really export. So there's a big gap. And this is in a national security issue to me, because we owe this money to all these foreign countries. My thing, what we doing, try to improve our export for Georgia products and services to other part of the world. It's not only we're looking for big company come over here, but what we produce, what we have, what we are doing in terms of selling our products and our service overseas to have an impact.
Yeah,
that's my other question. Thank you.
I'll take the first one so we don't track Georgia companies investing in other countries. We're most interested in who's investing here and those trends. We've tried to kind of figure that out. I think we actually got a research question related to that for this committee. And we don't have there's no good way for us to necessarily track Georgia companies. I guess if you said they were headquartered here, but if the company wasn't headquartered here, they had office here and they invested there. So we don't really have a good way to track that. But as far as exports, we have a trade division that works with businesses all over the state, and they work with a substantial amount of companies, mostly small businesses, under 500 jobs, and they help companies export and get their products overseas. They help some limited on the import side too. I'd be happy to follow up with you on what all the suite of services they provide. I've got some trade facts and other that I could send to you, but if you want to learn anything more about their operation.
Thank you. I'm just interested. I'm saying, we need to have even if you have a job companies headquartered in Georgia, they're investing somewhere else. We want them to invest in Georgia too, and to take some of this, the chips build, whatever come up, so we can keep not only Georgia company in Georgia, and then we can increase our export. That should be. I'm interested in myself.
Yeah. But rest assured, if we see a company that, and strategically investing, say manufacturing somewhere else, and we have a relationship with them, we'd probably ask, hey, is Georgia a consideration? That's probably something we would absolutely be doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. We appreciate it very much. I think next on the agenda, we have who?
Thank you.
Senator Tim Evans. The Honorable Tim Evans. Thank you, Tim, for being here today. We appreciate it very much, and always appreciate your good work in Hall County.
You notice he didn't mention that. Yeah.
That was,
You mentioned the
I'd say-
honorable connection.
that was a real slight.
No, I didn't take
part
it
of-
that way. Well, he mentioned those that he was most inspired by, I'm sure. But my claim to fame, so I grew up in Jefferson, Georgia. I'm Tim Evans, from the Greater Hall Chamber of Commerce, been in Gainesville, Hall County the last 17 years. But my real claim to fame is I started my career at the then Department of Industry, Trade and Tourism, with a young Angie Giesling, and she's still young. I've aged a lot, but it's interesting. We were talking about the UK hearing the conversation. The name was originally Industry and Trade, and you see that on the Trinity Washington building over the door. And it was named that after the Ministry of Industry and Trade in the UK. So Georgia took its department name. Prior to that, it had been the Georgia Department of Commerce. And one very good friend of a number of ours, one Abbott Massey, was the commissioner of the Georgia Department of Commerce before he was the executive director of the Georgia Poultry Federation. So, well, I won't spend all this time to talk with you about trivia, but while I was with the Department of Economic Development, I also managed our international offices, international business recruitment, and the marketing for the department in some of the roles that I did. But as a community economic developer, and there are a number of us in the room, we get a lot of our capital investment and job growth from international companies. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about that from our perspective. And, you know, Gainesville, Hall County is one of the 16 MSAs in Georgia, but we've really benefited from international investment, and it's certainly concentrated from a few areas. Some of this conversation today has already been about Northeast Asia, Japan, Korea, and Europe, but there are lots of other places where our capital investment has come from. And these are just a few of the companies that are listed on the screen, but we today have more than 55 international subsidiaries in Hall County. The vast majority of those come from across Europe, from the Czech Republic. We just recently added a new Austrian company, Agilox. They make the automated lift vehicles that Amazon and other companies use in their material handling, robotic forklifts. Beauplan of Belgium. They make a lot of the safety barriers that you see in manufacturing facilities. Clean Space of the UK. These are all brand new to Hall County in the last year and a half. But traditionally, our capital investment in Hall County has, from our international firms, has largely come from Japan. Our largest investor is Kubota, and they recently opened their new R&D facility for all of North America, and they have announced an additional $140 million in capital investment in what will be their 5th production facility in Hall County. They employ 2,000 today. They'll soon be at 2,500. But in Europe, Germany is our largest capital investment source by far, and it ranges from automotive to life sciences. Many traditional automotive companies like ZF, Friedrichshafen, they make gearboxes for the automotive industry, to Boehringer Ingelheim. And if you pronounce that at the end of the day, you've gotten everything you need out of today. Boehringer Ingelheim is they make animal health products, and in Gainesville, Hall County, they make most of the poultry vaccines that are used throughout North America. So if you eat chicken, turkey, or duck, then it's probably been vaccinated with a product made by Boehringer Ingelheim in Gainesville, Georgia. But they have their North American headquarters in Duluth, their research in Athens, and their headquarters just outside of Frankfurt. But they are one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. They just happen to be focused on animal health in pharmaceutical. A little bit about Europe in particular, since that's of key interest to us. And while I was with the department, I had a role in transitioning our office from where it was established in 1973 in Brussels, which is the head of the European Commission, to where it is today in Munich. And the department, I believe, has representation in the UK as well, for both export assistance and for foreign direct investment. But what you see on the screen, the little map there, is not my creation. It's something that was recognized back in the 70s and 80s. It's called the Blue Banana. And there is a swath from Manchester to Milan that historically has had the highest GDP productive capacity on the planet per capita. Europe has roughly 450 million in population. This area has about 110, 111 million in population, but represents the vast majority of the productive capacity per capita in the world. And historically, that comes from the sources of iron, copper, tin, coal to produce steel, and the development of steel in places like Birmingham and Manchester, where the Industrial Revolution really started. And in Germany and Middle Europe, they had all those same capabilities all the way to Milan in northern Italy. But what they had that was a little unique in Germany was the apprenticeship system and developing the next generation of talent by studying under meisters. And so many of us in Georgia have added apprenticeships to our own workforce development programs in the last few years. Germany in particular, and Austria and Switzerland, they've been doing this for over 150, nearly 200 years. And so it's given them a huge talent in that production area. So when we travel and talking with our existing industries, we've taken business groups from Hall County to Japan, to Europe, to Germany and the Netherlands. We use some of the same selling propositions that I'm sure you do for your communities and that the department does, that we're the center of a Southeastern marketplace, but we're also accessible throughout the world, not only through the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, but the Port of Savannah is a huge asset for all of us. Truck transit times for Europe being as far to the west in the Eastern time zone is a huge advantage. And it always has been for Georgia because we have shared business hours with those European headquarters. You go one state over into Alabama and you lose an hour of shared work time with Europe. Lanier Technical College is our local technical college partner, and the apprenticeship programs that we're offering there, we've started those with our German companies. They have been great stakeholders in getting that off the ground and building economies of scale for all our businesses. So that's pretty much all I had to share. I think there's some folks online with the Georgia Ports Authority. We're really excited in our existing industries, are thrilled in the region about the development of the inland port terminal in Gainesville to serve the existing industries in the region. But if I can answer any questions, I'll be happy to do so.
Real quickly, because I know we have some folks waiting online. Tell us what local economic development folks can do to help encourage investment in your particular area or in any particular area.
Sure. Yeah. I think in terms of working with international companies, it starts with at home, making sure that you've got the business parks, sites, infrastructure that you're developing, not just for international companies, but for any business. When you want to focus on working with international companies, I think there are specific needs there in reaching out to partners in your community. When you've got a new international manager that moves with an international company, they're in the US, they have no credit. They have no way to buy a car. They have no way to get, can you believe that? No way to buy a car without credit.
I'm known as the walking man's friend.
So, so being able to reach into your community and have a conversation with your local car dealer to help them, lease a car. This is,
We, all kidding aside, we've seen that on many occasions.
Yeah.
when international companies would come to town. They have no credit, they have no establishment, and we've gone on many occasions, several occasions rather, to help them find transportation.
they might have great credit in Germany or
Right.
Japan, wherever they're from, but in the United States, if you don't have a history on Equifax, TransUnion, the credit services, you don't exist.
In that world, in our world, is called a ghost,
Mhm.
and I often co-sign with them. But go ahead.
But it makes a big difference. And those little things that we can do to make them feel welcome and their families. We had one of our companies is from the Czech Republic, and the owners have two daughters, and they were living in North Gwinnett, and they were really excited about the Gwinnett School of Mathematics, a great program there. And they needed some help just getting their daughters transitioned from high school in Czech Republic to Gwinnett. And we were able to reach out through friends at Jackson EMC. Those kinds of personal connections make a huge difference. I know Angie does that with her companies too, but it makes a difference because if the manager and their family are not happy, the company's going to have problems. They're probably going to have a manager that eventually leaves here. And that gets back to the corporate headquarters that, well, we have a hard time keeping people in wherever. So as a local economic developer, I think that's actually a really high priority for us, addressing those personal needs.
Any further questions? Tim, thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. We would like to go to our friends from the ports if we could. I think we have Jamie McCurry online and maybe Lee Beckman with him.
Yes, sir. Glad to be with you all. Can you hear me okay?
Got you loud and clear.
Good. Well, if I can pull this off well, I'm going to share my screen and attempt to start a PowerPoint presentation here. I would note that Meister Evans would have no problem doing this no matter what. Noted that he pulled out his secret title in his presentation, which I respected. Ours will cover a few of our current highlights and a little bit about our trade market, and then certainly look forward to answering any questions. But I think most everybody there is quite familiar with our different locations, and of course, Tim has highlighted our newest pending location in Northeast Georgia. But in Savannah, we have the two deep water facilities, the Garden City Terminal and Ocean Terminal, and then down in Brunswick, deep water facilities at Colonel's Island, Mayor's Point, and East River. What I will talk about primarily in terms of our current trade statistics will be on the container side, which is really all in Savannah. And interestingly, the Garden City Container Terminal is the largest single container terminal facility in the Western Hemisphere. The Colonel's Island, we call it RORO, or roll-on roll-off facility, down in Brunswick, is actually the largest such facility of its kind in the country. So we kind of have bookend facilities between the two deep water ports. Down in Bainbridge, we have an inland river port that unfortunately has not seen a barge in quite a while, but we do use that facility for truck and rail movements serving the ag industry in Southwest Georgia. And then our inland intermodal facilities, the first one up in Murray County outside of Chatsworth, we call it the Appalachian Regional Port. I'm sure Senator Mullis can do just as good, probably a better job of talking about that than I can. And then the two facilities we have planned for the future, one in Hall County there, the Northeast Georgia Inland Port, and another planned, though not yet designed or engineered in LaGrange, that we so far have deemed that the West Central Georgia Inland Port. It is very close proximity to the Kia facility. And I won't spend a lot of time talking about the inland facilities, but I will note that the key with those inland intermodal facilities is that they are essentially an extension of the container terminal in Savannah. So it is a rail connection point where whether they be imports or exports coming out of those marketplaces, they are actually what we call interchanging into the port, or at least the port system in those inland locations. The viability of those locations really is based on a balanced import and export demand in that market. The facility in Murray County, of course, is pulling from not just Northwest Georgia, but also from Tennessee, Western North Carolina, Northeastern Alabama, and the North Metro area. So from a demand standpoint, you've got a very export rich region as well as a high consumer demand region. And that's what it kind of takes to make the nuances of logistics work out for those inland facilities. And we're excited about the role that they'll continue to play in the future. But I mentioned the Garden City Terminal. I'll be surprised if most everybody in the room there has not been to the Garden City facility before. Like I said, it is the largest such facility in this hemisphere, and it's continuing to grow. We've been very stressed in the recent couple of years, kind of post-pandemic, even though I would say probably better said as the post-height of the pandemic. We have been under a deluge of cargo, and it has advanced our capital expansion plans by years based on the demand put on this facility. So we can talk about that a little bit more as we look at what the pandemic has done. But simply in terms of the past year, again, I'm no surprise to this group. We saw significant growth the last fiscal year. This 8% growth is on top of around a 20% growth the prior year coming out of the depths of the pandemic. And it's just been quite a challenging time, a great time in terms of the numbers, but it's been challenging on the industry, challenging on our employees, challenging on job creation, but very good problem to have at that. Where we stand today, not much different than you've probably seen in recent years, but Savannah is the third busiest complex for the handling of import and export containers for the country. Los Angeles and Long Beach are technically two port authorities, but they are adjacent to one another. So we look at these more in the context of locations, and you'll see that Savannah is, the third in this position with quite a big gap between us and Virginia. And so you can really see where the load centers for trade are for the country in terms of the container port facilities. When you look at the market share on the export side, I think this is, and we heard an export question earlier. This, I think, is a good point of pride for all Georgians. The fact that Savannah, which is clearly a much smaller market than the folks that are just behind us, is actually the leading export container port for the country. And so that's a position we've not been in before, and we're very pleased to be in that position now, and hopefully we can stay there. One thing that I think a lot of people may not be as familiar with is, even though we're the third busiest gateway for containerized trade in the country, Savannah is just behind New York in terms of the most connected port. And you actually will see on this slide that the rankings here, the lower the number, the better, of course. Most of the higher ranked ports are on the East Coast. When you actually get to the West Coast, it's such a predominance of Asian trade that you see better or more international connectivity on the East Coast, because not only are we certainly trading with Asia in great volumes, we're also trading more with Europe, more with South America, and more with Africa than what you see on the West Coast. So Savannah, just behind New York there in terms of the global connectivity rankings. And then what are our biggest markets? This is a kind of a 5-year comparison, and not surprisingly, when you look at the country with which we have the most overall trade, it is China. China is certainly not declining in terms of the overall volume, but it has declined in this 5-year window of time in terms of the ratio. You see that 1.2% market share decline, that being picked up mostly by Vietnam, India, and Korea. Markets that actually kind of picked up some of the, maybe slack's not the right word to use, but when you saw the COVID impacts in China and how it affected trade coming out of that country, alternative routes were identified. That's why some of this market share shift has occurred, that and some other factors. But that's kind of stuck. The reliance on China as not the Savannah or the Georgia reliance on China, but the overall global trade reliance on China is diminished a little bit as we've seen coming out of the pandemic. Strictly from an import side, the market shift is a little bit greater, declining by 5%. That again being shippers having to find different outlets out of China versus the Chinese ports themselves. And so I think the numbers here speak for themselves. And when you look at the export side of the equation, the China has not really dipped at all in terms of the market share reliance on Georgia exports. But again, it still does lead in terms of our number one trading partner on the export side. And you see where the gains and losses are relative to other countries. But on this slide, what you do see is while China is the number one trading partner port, when you compare the other slice of the pie here, nearly half of all the export trade coming out of Georgia is through Savannah is not going to these leading countries. It's going to more countries that are on the list here from Europe, from South America, and again, growing economies in Africa, becoming more of a prevalent trade location as well. Now, for us, and again, in handling this cargo, there's been several major projects that have been ongoing, and really this says projects finished or near completion. Effectively, all of these are complete. The Savannah Harbor Deepening Project, in terms of the actual dredging itself, was completed back in March. There are pieces of this from a mitigation standpoint that are ongoing. The same goes for the Mason Mega Rail, which is our very large intermodal rail yard expansion here in Savannah. The working tracks there have been completed. There is some other additional remediation that's going to lessen the burden of rail through the neighboring communities that is still underway and will be completed this fall. And then the pop-up yards, what that refers to is some of the non-GPA owned facilities that we have utilized primarily with some rail partners to store longer dwelling containers, whether they be imports or exports. Most of them were imports. But again, coming out of this pandemic and the deluge of cargo, there has simply been more volume than the shippers could absorb, even though they're the ones ordering the goods. They've not been able to pick up and warehouse and move those products as quickly as is necessary to keep up with their orders. So we've had to find additional places to store those goods for them until the demand, until they needed them in those warehouses. So those pop-up yards, we had one in Savannah, one actually the abandoned runway at the Statesboro Airport. That's an interesting one. A rail yard in Atlanta. And we used some extra space at our Appalachian Regional Port. And then we actually used some facilities in North Carolina and Alabama as outlets to put these import boxes closer to their inland destinations. The need for those pop-up yards is kind of waning. They're starting to wrap up. We're better able to hold for a longer period of time some of these longer dwell imports so that the retailers have more time to get them out of the traditional container facility here in Savannah. So those will probably gradually wind down over the next 6 to 12 months. I mentioned the mega rail facility. This is a relatively recent picture. All of the remaining construction here is outside of the picture, but you can totally see that the working tracks are complete. One thing that you might not be able to notice is there are 10 cranes now in this picture. You see the number 10, but what's missing is a few of the lower numbers that have been added at the other end of this track. So we have 5 massive overhead cranes working 9 tracks in each of 2 bundles. So it's a really impressive facility. And this allows us to very easily serve those inland intermodal facilities, but also gives us a broader reach for Georgia to serve as the inlet and outlet for trade to the mid-American markets. Chicago, St. Louis, Memphis is a tremendous market for us, and even over into Dallas. So this is doubling the rail capacity for the facility here at Garden City. That and many other projects have we've spent over $1 billion of the GPA earnings here to accomplish those capital improvements over the last 10 years. But what we have on the docket now for the next dozen years is significantly more than that. We have actually over the last year sold our first bonds in quite some time. We've sold actually about $1.5 billion in bonds to serve the capital demands that are being placed on us now for expansion to continue to handle this growth and trade. And we've got a pretty robust capital plan that we're going to make sure we get done and get done well to continue to serve Georgia and be able to accommodate the trade that our partners at Economic Development continue to generate for us. With those projects this year, the investments that we have been making allowed us to handle right at 6 million, what we call TEUs, or 20-foot equivalent container units. By the end of this fiscal year, we'll have 2 additional projects completed that will bump that capacity up to, on the yard side, you can see 7 million TEUs, and on the berth side, 7.5 million. Believe it or not, there are 2 different capacity numbers there. One is on the berth side is how much volume with proper velocity can we move over the docks, and then how much can we accommodate in the storage capacity over the course of the year in the yard. Obviously, you want those things to be essentially in balance with one another, but as the different capital projects progress over the coming decade first, and then over the coming 2 decades to follow, you can see those numbers kind of climbing a little bit incrementally. And I will say that when we look at the 2030 and 2050 capacities, those are looking at actual facilities beyond just Garden City as the primary container terminal. The 2030 number is a conversion of Ocean Terminal, which today does some containers. That facility long-term will be exclusively containers. That's the, well, I should say exclusively, mostly containers. That's the smaller facility here in Savannah. And then as we grow beyond that, even we'll look across the river to our property on Hutchinson Island, where we have about 400 acres that we can look to add an additional or a third container terminal here in Savannah before moving on to the demands beyond that. So we are continuing to work with our partners to grow trade. We're continuing to work to make sure we've got the capacity to accommodate the demands that are placed on us by the state and our trading partners. And we look forward to continuing to be a market leader in the service that goes along with that. So that is the end of the presentation, but certainly happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Can you go back to the earlier slides where you showed the state of Georgia and the various inland ports?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
One more.
And I'll tell you what my question revolves around. My question revolves around what states are doing inland ports, or countries for that matter, are doing inland ports best. And if you had a magic wand, how many inland ports would you have in Georgia? And that's the first part of my question. And then your description of the pop-up yards seems to support the prospect of a long-term future of inland ports. And then there's one question I'd like for you to address that. And then Bainbridge, tell us what's going on with Bainbridge in particular. If there's any sector of this state that needs economic investment and development, I think it's the southwest sector of the state. So I'll turn that back to you if you don't mind.
Sure. I think I'll start in reverse order if you don't mind. And with Bainbridge, I mentioned that we haven't had a barge at that facility in over 20 years, 25 years, really. That is not for a lack of interest or certainly of capability on not just the Georgia Port Authority, but the state of Georgia's perspective, but the waterway system itself. And this does get intermingled with the water wars to a certain degree, but the waterway system that in the past has handled barge traffic, not just for Georgia in that system, but also for Alabama, is no longer maintained. The Corps of Engineers has not been able to maintain that. They've not been funded to maintain that. And so there has been some recent momentum to try to jumpstart that again. And despite the fact that dredging in the deep water ports can be extraordinarily expensive, even though the distance there to access Bainbridge by water and frankly beyond Bainbridge is it's not nearly as expensive to just clean it up as what we've had to deal with over on the coast. So the hope is that we can in the relatively near future see a revitalization in barge traffic. Whether there's a market for that anymore, if the infrastructure existed for it, is hard for me to say. But what we have been doing, again, absent the ability to handle barges, is to use the facility as a I guess a depot, if you will, for serving the ag industry there. You've got fertilizers and grains, feeds that are either coming off of trains or off of trucks and being distributed. Either if it's being distributed throughout the region, there's of course being distributed by truck, but that can be inbound into our facility by either truck or train. We have been able to enjoy quite a consistent business over there. It's not a tremendous growth market, but it could be probably if the barge traffic was there. But for now, it's a very sustainable asset in terms of serving that ag community over there in Southwest Georgia. It could
So it's-
possibly be an inland intermodal facility as well in the future. The big thing there in each of these places, as I mentioned earlier, is you got to have a balance. And so in Bainbridge's case, the export side is arguably there from the agricultural market. But the consumer goods side, you really would be relying on probably Tallahassee to have enough of a demand for the import containers to be, utilized in that close proximity to the facility. And so just strictly based on population, the consumer goods side that would generate the import demand in the region is not quite as mature as it is in some of the other areas.
Thank you. It's disappointing that the Corps of Engineers is not maintaining that waterway and that we can't develop that further, but that's another subject for another day.
Yes,
What
sir.
about the the first question regarding what would the ideal network look like?
Well, we do. You also asked what other states are doing it, what other areas are doing it. And Virginia's got a historically successful inland port. South Carolina does, and the South Carolina port there in Greer, that is of course very close to the BMW plant, and that's a good illustration of that balance of import and export demand. Even though that's a production facility like the Kia facility, obviously in West Point, the containers that are coming into the country to serve, from a parts and supply standpoint, that manufacturing facility, that's the import driver for that area. And then on the export side, they are sending finished vehicles from that facility to Charleston, in some cases actually to Georgia for export. That's not dissimilar to what we would see with the West Central Georgia inland port that we have planned for the future, except that Kia doesn't export a great deal out of that facility today. They may export more in the future, but that area is again a very robust agricultural market. So the export container demand is there as we're able to identify the capital to plug into that area and develop that site. The Northeast Georgia product is much more mature. The engineering is done. We're simply waiting at this point on the NEPA, the federal environmental approvals, to be in place before we can actually start construction of that facility. And again, you've got not only a robust manufacturing and agricultural market there, but a great consumer demand, which is why the ARP facility again has also been very successful. As far as what more might be needed in the future, one of the pop-up yards has been in Atlanta at a relatively, defunct is not the right word to use, but a no longer highly used facility that we have used as one of these pop-up yards, and there could be enough market demand to continue to use that on a relatively small scale compared to the other facilities. But that's an opportunity. The Northeast Georgia Inland Port actually will serve the Northeast metro area to a large degree, and diminish to a certain point how much demand we would have had for that pop-up yard if the Northeast Georgia facility was already existing over the past year and a half. Middle Georgia, again, it depends on the balance of demand, but we do see some possibilities long-term for maybe another intermodal facility in the middle part of the state. Beyond that, again, where these facilities are, not just the inland facilities, but the mega rail facility here in Savannah, going outside of Georgia, we're seeing demand to use our port to get goods and services to and from Chicago, St. Louis, Memphis, Texas, etc. That probably does not change. That only grows, and it probably continues to grow because of the congestion, the difficulty of getting products into the West Coast from Asia, and then distributed from the West Coast overland, as far east as those inland destinations. The shippers are seeing more success doing that via Savannah and via Virginia in some cases than they are again using the West Coast. So that's a lot of how that market tends to look for shaping up in the future.
One last question. I'll leave you alone. Let some of these other guys ask a question. One, was there once upon a time a facility in Cordele? And
There-
it seemed
Yes, sir. There is a facility in Cordele. It's a locally owned industrial park there, and they were able to partner for a period of time with CSX and the Heart of Georgia Railroad to move some boxes in and out of that area. I think that what ended up making that place ultimately not very successful is the cost of doing that in combination of the two railroads and a lack of maybe mature demand in that area. Using that facility to go as far north as West Point and trying to serve that Kia market, it was just too much of an expensive over the road haul after riding the train than a facility that will be much closer to it. So it's it's unfortunate, but that Cordele facility just didn't ultimately pan out on a business perspective. That was not a GPA owned and operated facility, but we did do our best to support that from a marketing standpoint.
Thank you. I said I had two last questions. I'm sorry. The last one is, on every one of your pie charts, China was the dominant player. Is that, China's, if you looked at Southern California and you looked at Portland and Washington, would they have the same pie chart in terms of prevalence of China versus other countries? And does that alarm you?
They probably would. I can't quote their numbers, but alarm me. I guess it doesn't alarm me because it is not new news. It is certainly real. I think that you see, as you can see in this chart, this is again the import and export combined. That market share has diminished some. I do think it will continue to diminish some, and you'll see other Asian markets picking up that drop. But I would assume that the ports that you just listed would have an even higher share. Sorry, my light keeps going on. The predominance of trade for the West Coast ports is so heavy on the Asian side, and of course China is the behemoth in that regard, that their numbers are probably skewed even higher with less of the diversity.
Thank you very much for your insights and for your comments. And what other questions does the committee have? I recognize number 4 on your chart, number 1 in your heart, Senator Halpern.
Chairman.
Hey, grab Shake's mic.
Grab Shake's mic. Grab Mike's Shake.
You can hear me. Will you go to the slide that shows, I think it's the next one, that shows now number 1 above the other major ports in this country for
This one?
exports?
Yeah, there you go.
It's that one. So here's my question. I noticed that New York, New Jersey Port Authority, their numbers went down between 2017 and 2021. Ours went up. So my question is, are there, like, as our numbers going up, is there opportunity, like, are we in fact taking business away from other ports and drawing more attention to what we have to offer as a port? Is that kind of how the business works? Are we pulling from other places and attracting people to use our ports? Or what
if it's not that, then what could account for the growth that we're seeing?
So that's a great question, and it's a great question to ask relative to this slide, because what you'll see is that U.S. exports, the total number here in container units actually declined in this window of time. So we grew overall in a declining market. So it's not that we just picked up market share while we dropped with everybody else. So obviously we did gain from some other places in terms of that market share. If you look at the total trade, which obviously brings in imports, the bottom line there is very much in a different direction. Total trade has definitely increased. And in that regard, our market share has also increased. So the reason I say it's a not only a great question, but particularly of interest with this particular slide, is that if I was answering that question just in a very general way, I would say that we have grown faster than our competition by seizing more of new opportunities. And we've seized a greater portion of the new opportunities primarily at the expense of the West Coast ports. And there's a lot of supply chain, logistics, congestion factors that I could explain as to why that's true. But when you're looking at this slide and you're seeing a decrease in trade, some of those factors, say, wait a second, that can't quite be the same answer. So yes, overall we've grown, and we've grown not necessarily at the expense of other ports. When you look at this slide, clearly we have grown by not only capturing more market share, but some of that market share is very much coming from other places. You don't see, beyond the top 10 ports here, but it's pretty clear where, New York and New Jersey are down, but Savannah and Houston and Virginia to a lesser degree are up. So that's where you can see a shift from, say, what's going out of New York versus going out of those other markets. On the West Coast side, I think that heavily favors Savannah and Houston. It's just so hard to get containers through those ports, and particularly if you've got an import box that is coming to the East Coast instead of going on the West Coast because of that congestion. Most of the time, an import container is going to be stripped out or emptied relatively close to the port that it comes into, and in a similar fashion, it's going to be filled closer to the port that it is going to go out of. So once you've got that import in a region, it's typically going to stay in that region. So the exports, they may come on a train from a distance, but they're going to be loaded in a facility that's closer to the port, kind of on a typical basis. So there's a lot in that question, a lot in that probably confusing answer. But relative to exports, I think it's fair to say we've taken some of that trade from other ports. Relative to the overall, it's a little more washed out, and it's just us capturing market share opportunities where others are not able to.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Mullis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, James, for being with us today and being back on. And please give
Regards to Griff Lynn too, or Griff Lynch. We appreciate all the great work that you and your team do over there. Now I've got a prepared question, and I've got to read it just like it says. As one of the biggest arrows in Georgia's quiver, and I'm going to add, in our competitor states that are quivering in Georgia's great ability at our ports authority. That was pretty good, wasn't it?
Stick to the script.
Okay. When it comes to international presence and economic engine that the ports authority are, what are the ports seeing and hearing from our international partners of the challenges and the strengths about Georgia's ability to move containers and so forth around?
Well, I think that it's been a tough year and a half for everybody that would be involved in that equation. But where Georgia has been able to do more, arguably better than other places, has been our adaptability. The fact that we have had a kind of a rolling 10-year strategic plan to, address not just what we need today, but plan for the future and to have some cushions in our capacity, if you will. If we had not had that forward planning for years now, I'm not trying to pat any of the staff on the back for that. That's just been the mantra. But if we had not had that kind of surplus capacity to handle the ebb and flow, then the last year and a half had been a lot tougher. But also the flexibility to adjust and bring forward some of the longer term capital projects to a earlier time. That's where we've been able to handle a greater share of the burden that's been placed on ports around the country than other places. Because again, you look at the West Coast, which they are clearly larger and handle more goods, but they have zero flexibility. They just are full. And the roads and the rail in and out of those ports is full. You look up and down the East Coast, and nobody has had the luxury of room to grow that we have had. The fact that we had 86 or so thousand container slots on terminal about a year and a half ago. And today we have just over 100,000 slots because we've been able to adjust more quickly than others. But at 86,000, that was probably 3 times, 4 times what the next largest facility could have offered. And so the way that Georgia set up the Georgia Ports Authority, the way that we're governed, the way that we're an operating port authority versus just a landlord, and can kind of get in and make adjustments where other places as a landlord really have very little control over their tenants. You've seen that really play out over the last 2 years as a benefit in Georgia, and it's affected the way that our customers have reacted and sending more here. And I'd say it's been a pretty big factor in some of these large economic development projects that we were hearing about earlier, because the risks are too great in some other places, and Georgia's better able to deliver.
I think a good benefit would be that we don't have labor issues like they do in California, and we're able to move merchandise or containers a lot quicker. So
Yes, sir.
that's my thought. I've been there and I've seen it. A couple of questions, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind. I'm sure you don't. I would like to, you hear about this supply chain problem, and a lot of ships still out in not in the harbor, but waiting to come in. How are we on that situation? Do you have ships still waiting to be
We do.
escorted?
We've got about 3 dozen, give or take. Every day is a different day. There are a number of reasons that that's happened. One, talking about the capital growth, we have closed one berth so that we could make it bigger and better able to handle the larger ships. But being down a berth is not to our advantage right now. But when we had already started taking it out before these challenges happened, it was impossible to start using it again. So we just got to finish it. On top of that, though, in addition to what would be approximately 35 regularly scheduled weekly calls, we've had a great number of extra loaders, they might be referred to, which should put us where some weeks we're having 4 dozen ships arrive instead of 3 dozen. And that on top of the fact that you're down a berth makes it difficult to keep up with the pace. But when you compare it to other places, there have been other ports that the facilities themselves have simply been full, and they couldn't bring a ship to the dock, not because they didn't have berth space, but because if they took any boxes off the ship, they didn't have any place to put the box. So it's been a tough little while, but we're working through it. We think over the course of the next couple of months, we'll make some significant progress and get kind of back to what would be normal for us. We wish there were no ships at anchor out there, but fortunately the deepening is done and we can get bigger ships in and out of here quicker and more safely. We just got to work through the backlog that's resulted from the kind of inordinate amount of cargo coming this way versus other places.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, the entire panel and those who came to testify. Jamie, thank you for for making time for us, and please say hello to our friends in the ports. And I want to thank the committee members for being here. But I'd like to recognize the senator from Chickamauga for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the gentleman who has ran the Georgia Economic Development Association. He's done an outstanding job. He's trying to retire, but they won't let him because he's so good. But if you'd help me recognize and appreciate Kevin Shea. Hey! I'm through.
Any further questions, comments from committee members? Senator Gooch, you've been uncharacteristically quiet. The senator from the city of trees, Holmes.
We don't have trees anymore. The
Yeah.
tornado got them.
Yeah.
Did you say we had an hour each for point of personal privilege?
1 hour. Yes.
Well, I just want to say thank you for letting me be a part of this committee.
Praise the Lord. I'm looking for a motion. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much.